Well, over the weekend at Pac-12 Media Days, Commissioner George Kliavkoff spoke. A lot of people listened, and what did he say, and what exactly does it mean? We'll find out. Let's go.
Are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. We are back to in-season here at the Locked On College Network, which means we are back to 5 days a week, set for maybe one off a month, maybe. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing wherever you're listening to or watching this show. I appreciate everybody out there who has done so already. If you ever want a question answered here on the show, at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac12 are the Twitter handles where you can reach me. You can hop in the YouTube comments as well. I monitor those and engage with a lot of you in there, and I love doing that. You can also tweet with the hashtag AskLOP12. Had some caught my throat there. That was interesting. All right, so I got a kick out of watching Pac-12 Media Day. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but whenever stuff like this happens, I do. There was this SNL skit years ago called the Charles Barkley Post-Game Translator app, which is a great skit. It's kind of hard to find on YouTube, but it was a great skit. And basically, he was talking about how, he'd help you cut through the BS of coaches and players in post-game press conferences or pre-game press conferences and whatnot. And, there are definitely moments where I feel like I'm saying those sorts of lines in my head when people are talking, because obviously you're not getting a full depiction of how coaches and players actually feel about the team. Is a lot of it true? Yeah, of course is. But there are just some things where a coach says something and I'm like, nope, not quite. But let's start with the commissioner here. And he opened Pac-12 football media days, of course, as you would expect, and pretty tough spot to be in if you're George Kliavkoff. But I'm going to run through a number of the things he said, kind of break it down and go through it. I think the biggest thing that he was really hammering home in his opening remarks was talking about the student athletes in the Pac-12, and he had a quote in there that said, "We have collectively lost sight of the student athlete." I think that's a pretty fair statement to make. I mean, none of these decisions are being made with the mindset of, well, we want to do exactly what's best for the student athlete. Like, no, none of this conference realignment talk is anything like that. It may be a consideration. It may be something they think about at a conference or school level when they're ironing out the details of these moves or negotiations, but it is not a driving factor. And I agree with that. But when he made that statement, I thought, well, I don't know how many major decisions in college athletics, even at a conference level, are being made with the student athletes first and foremost in mind in that sense. But I do agree with that statement that it's not like people are making these moves and thinking first and foremost about, the people who are actually going to play the games on television. They're just thinking about who's going to play, who's going to be watching, how much money you'll make, and such. And then there was this big-ish moment, or at least that's how a lot of people were kind of treating it. I was watching, and then I was scrolling through Twitter and seeing how other media members and outlets were reacting to that sort of stuff, because I like seeing differing opinions and how people are receiving the information. But he was asked a question about the Big 12. He was asked several questions about conference realignment and what could be next and all that sort of stuff. He said, quote, "With respect to the Big 12 being open for business," which the Big 12 commissioner said that they were in terms of expansion and whatnot. "With respect to the Big 12 being open for business, I appreciate that. We haven't decided if we're going shopping there or not yet." He later confirmed that the Big 12 has been, quote, "lobbing grenades, reaching out to schools in the Pac-12, trying to destabilize the conference, poach their teams." And, he was not hiding the ball on that, which I think is nice, refreshing moment of honesty. Like he's not saying, no, I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's like, dude, we all know. Like it's happened, and he is actively trying to address it because that's his job as commissioner is to do what's in the best interest of the conference, which is, of course, to keep as many teams together as he can. And that quote in particular had a lot of people reacting in a sense of like, oh my gosh, gloves are off. He's going to war. Here we go. And there was definitely, you could sense some bitterness in what he was saying and how he was saying it as well. Like he is not thrilled at all of this. He also, as I'll get to a little later, recognizes that this is not entirely a problem of his making. In fact, it's almost not at all a problem of his making, but it's one he has to deal with instead. But a lot of people were saying like, "Oh, this is some, big quote," and like, "Oh boy, gloves are out. Here we go. Drop the, let them go at it and whatnot." And look, I like the mentality there from Kliavkoff. I do because as someone who wants to see the Pac-12 stay together and survive, even with the 10 remaining schools, and try to become something at least comparable to what it was in the past, even if that's not totally attainable in every sense. I think you could still do some moves that I, as a fan, would like to see them do. And so I like seeing my commissioner have this sort of attitude about it, and kind of starting to go on the offensive. I think that was the biggest thing with this quote was it was the first time it really felt like someone from the Pac-12 was playing offense rather than defense, or being caught off guard, right? He's trying to make a move in that sense, or kind of send a message of we're not going to just roll over here, which is great. But the latter part of that quote where he says, let me get to it there. Oh yeah, we haven't decided if we're going shopping there or not yet. I respect the mentality, but let's be real about it again. Little Charles Barkley post presser translator app here. The Pac 12 does not have any options to go to a Power 5 conference right now and make an offer, unless it was with the ACC somehow, but that's complicated because of the TV media rights deal. Like the Pac 12 is not in a position where Big 12 schools would want to leave the Big 12 to come to the Pac 12. I like that he's saying that and that he's showing some feistiness in that sense. Um, but I heard that and I was like, that's a very optimistic look at how the conference realignment might play out next. Um, but again, I respect the mentality. Another thing he talked about is the media rights deal that is being negotiated at this point in time, and he had a number of interesting things to say on that front, and also on the realignment front, which I'll get to after I tell you about Locked On at or LinkedIn rather here, a sponsor at the Locked On Network. As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it simple and easy to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. They have nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn every single week. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So he naturally got asked, Kliavkoff did, the commissioner, about the impending negotiations with regards to the Pac-12 media rights deals. And that's just such a fascinating spot. And by fascinating, I mean borderline impossible and insanely difficult for him to be in as a commissioner, because he said they're aggressively pursuing expansion. Like that is an option that they are looking at. He wasn't naming names or naming schools, but he said that they're aggressively pursuing expansion, which is something you would expect, right? Because you're not going to be able to have as high a ceiling on your conference from a valuation standpoint or a competitive standpoint if you stick with 10 as opposed to going to 12 or maybe 14 teams. Maybe it's the Pac 14 that's incoming. I don't know. And he wouldn't go into that. But he provided some insight on their timeline with regards to that, and it's not going to be that soon, depending on how you define that soon. In the coming weeks, we are not going to hear details about the Pac-12's media rights deal and how it's being negotiated and what the figures are. Like nothing will be finalized for quite a while. I think it's fair to say that at this point in time, with so much uncertainty going forward, I can't see Kliavkoff seeking a long-term deal the way the ACC has done. And the ACC is in a little bit of a precarious spot because they don't have a ton of conference depth right now. They have a lot of very viable teams and media markets as well, but they are not at their peak and in terms of a competitive balance standpoint and their conference, the revenue sharing that they have to all their member schools is a great deal lower than the other Power Five conferences right now, even the Pac-12 on its current deal, which as we know is not very good. And so the ACC is locked into that deal through 2036. And I think that's a model for the Pac-12 to try to avoid because if you're considering whether it's a merger or expansion or whatever new plans are on the horizon for the Conference of Champions here, you don't want to lock yourself into a deal that goes too far into the future because then you limit potential opportunities that could come in, you know, 4 or 5 years, right? So the idea of getting a deal that is, 10, 15 years long or whatever with whatever network would want to take the Pac 12 doesn't seem particularly likely because of the uncertainty in the future and the limitations that could potentially impose. Now, one thing that he did talk about is and on the timeline, they're going to wait for the Big Ten negotiations to end, is what he said, which makes some sense because I think that will help kind of set the market and understand the value. And maybe he wants to use that as hard to say the Pac 12 could have leverage, but maybe he wants to use that to try to get certain dollar figures. Say like, look, if the Big Ten got this and we're not at that level, but we believe we can get here and this or whatnot, maybe he could use that to set the bar a little bit higher for how much money they could get from the network and such. But one thing that I think will be really, really interesting to follow because these sorts of companies are moving into the professional sports landscape is whether there will be a digital partnership, meaning a streaming company like Amazon or Apple. Apple has moved heavily into the Major League Baseball sphere, and they have several games a week. And Amazon, of course, is where you watch Thursday Night Football, right? They're in the NFL. They've got Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit in their booth for the 2022 season and beyond. So whether or not they go into that space, I think could be an opportunity worth exploring because if your conference is not going to be as valuable in the eyes of the networks because of the other conferences available, you can kind of increase your value in an individual negotiation, I think, if you're the only one that's going to a digital partner like Apple or Amazon. So that's something else. And what he said about that quote, I would say it's highly likely that we will end up with a big digital partner for some of our rights, and that our rights will be distributed in a way that's unique, different, and new. We're excited about that. I have no idea what that would look like. It's fun to think about because it would be new, certainly, but I think right now their attention has to be on who the major network partner is going to be. But that certainly will be a factor, or at least he indicated that it would be a factor. And I thought that was noteworthy, and we're going through everything that our commissioner said here. The other thing he talked about was NIL, and I remember in the olden days of like a month and a half ago when NIL was the biggest talk about how it was ruining college football and such. And I'm not in love with everything that's come about with NIL, but I thought he made an interesting comment here that I'll get to. But that feels so long ago, and the transfer portal was a disaster, or it was great, or it was something in between. Or, like that was the big talk, and now that's just been completely thrown to the wayside here. But there's still ever evolving rules and regulations that are speculated and such. about NIL and the transfer portal. And this is what the commissioner said, quote, with respect to name, image, and likeness, I believe it is time for the 10 FBS conferences to step in and agree to NIL legislation and a strong, effective, and expeditious enforcement mechanism. Some good words in there. It's nice vocabulary. All 10 conferences are strongly in favor of student athletes being able to benefit from their NIL. And I think most college football fans are as well. What college football fans get hot and bothered about, and I'm kind of in this category too, is how NIL is used as a recruiting tool. Rather than saying, look, these opportunities are here and this is what our school is set up. We have a partnership with this collective and you'll be able to explore and maximize your opportunities with companies or entities that want to come to you with marketing opportunities so you can make money off of your name, image, and likeness. What they don't like as much, and what I don't like as much either, and I understand it's happened for a long time in college football, but it is certainly exacerbated now with NIL, and Lane Kiffin has had some choice words about this particular subject, is that what you have allowed with legalizing NIL but not putting a lot of guidelines on it is you have these big boosters or donors or collective operatives or whoever is involved with it just going and saying we'll give you this amount of money if you come to this school, and that's not what NIL was supposed to be. I don't think that's even what the people who are on the front lines the hardest advocating for NIL legalization or monetization, I guess is the better word there. We're thinking that this is what it would be, right? The ideal idealist crowd of, hey, let's allow players to profit from their NIL, which I agree with, is you're at a school already. You went through a typical recruiting process. You chose a school that was best for you or you thought would be the best for your football career. And then someone else came and approached you, right? Like a company, a brand, organization, whatever, and they said, "Look, we'd like to pay you some money if you promote this product, on your social media and whatnot." That's kind of the rosy version of it, and you're always going to have some of those backdoor channels, right? No matter what the rules are, because before you couldn't do it, and we know that players have been paid in college football for a very long time. I'm not saying that they haven't been or that it will completely go away, but if you talk to people who are in and around the recruiting scene or the college football scene, they'll tell you that it has gotten worse because they're allowed to approach these people with these sorts of offers. So I like that, and I think he's right. I do not think he is giving commissioner speak and saying that I believe it is time for the 10 FBS conferences to step in and agree to NIL legislation. All 10 conferences are strongly in favor of student athletes being able to benefit from their NIL. I don't think conferences think it's feasible or even want to put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. But I do think that some legislation to regulate how you can talk to high school players about this sort of stuff, so it's not just, hey, this I'm going to go to this school over here because they're going to give me the most money. And that goes back to one of his opening comments, which is we've lost sight of the student athlete here. Like, sure, a guy may legally have like that. Where that's where it gets tough is whether or not courts will step in and say no, you can't stop someone from doing this and whatnot. But my belief personally, I don't think it's in someone's best interest to just go to whichever school is offering them the most money. I don't think that's going to yield the best long-term results for them, and I don't think that's in the best interest of the overall health and competitive landscape in college football. So I was glad to see him say that. I don't know how quickly that stuff could come about, but I know that there's a non-zero amount of discussion amongst coaches, and they get asked questions all the time and clearly have thoughts about all this sort of stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if within the next year we see some sort of move on, okay, you can profit from your NIL, but here are the rules and by the way, there's rules and guidelines on just about everything. Like it's not an unreasonable thing to say like, hey, you got to have some rules on this. Professional sports leagues have it as well, and if you see it as the professionalization of college sports, which in some ways it is, but in other ways it is not, there are rules on there's a salary cap, right? You can only give a player right a max extension in the NBA or NFL, so I don't think that there's that much difference in being able to say like, hey, you can do this, but you got to have some guardrails up here so that we don't have this, that, and the other outcome. We close today's show with a mailbag question, which I will get to after I tell you about Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, Go Mariners, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we're closing with a mailbag question related to what we've been discussing here on the show today, or I guess I've been discussing. But I'd like to think that you're following along, and whether you're listening or watching, and maybe having some thoughts in your head, and maybe I say that thought in your head in the very next sentence. I've had that happen before, and so maybe that's like an interpersonal conversation of sorts. But if you ever want to be a part of the conversation, hashtag AskLOP12, or you DM me at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12, and you get a question answered here on the show. YouTube comments, you can hop in there as well. This one comes from at CFB_dugout. After hearing the media days, what are the next imminent, realistic steps the conference will make? Are you more confident in the conference existing? I'm going to answer the first question, and then I'm going to answer the second part of that question, because I have two very different feelings with regards to them. So the next imminent realistic steps are to figure out who your expansion teams could possibly be. Because I think if you're Kliavkoff as the commissioner, you have a stronger bargaining chip, or you are able to do more if you can go to the table to negotiate a media rights deal, and you have 2 or 4 more teams coming into your conference that you can then pitch as bringing added value that you weren't otherwise going to have, to raise the value of your conference and how much a network might be willing to pay. So I think expansion is first, and where they will go for that, there are a number of options. I wonder if they will dip into the Texas market. I had a conversation with a friend of mine about that recently, and I thought it was kind of interesting. You've got SMU over there, who's in the Dallas area, and look, if the Pac-12 could go back in time, yeah, maybe they would have added TCU and somebody else back then. But maybe you go and you go to the Group of 5 level. You add like UTSA and SMU to try to just get a Texas footprint, right? In addition to adding like a San Diego State and UNLV or Boise or Utah State or whoever they would decide to add from the Mountain West there. But I'd be surprised if they go and talk about the new media rights deal and negotiate it out and then go to expansion. So I think you have to look, and he said very openly they're aggressively pursuing expansion opportunities. So if that's the case, I think you have to look at that before you can go into the media rights negotiations, because that will come second. And he also, remembers, I said earlier, he pointed out that they were probably going to wait until the Big Ten finishes up. So the Big Ten's got to finish up, then the negotiations have to start, they have to take place and all that. So I think we're looking at a timeline that will take place over the course of several months. And I'll continue to cover this, of course, once the season begins, which, oh my gosh, I can't wait for. I need football really, really badly. I'm sure many of you do as well, which is why you should like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching right now. But I think expansion comes first, and then I think the media rights negotiations come second. And I could honestly foresee a scenario where maybe in a couple months they announce, some expansion teams if schools decide that they want to take an offer from the Pac-12, and then you could have a serious dead period there. I mean, this Big Ten deal, I don't know what the specific timeline of it is, but if you're going to wait until after that, you could be looking at 6 months. You could be looking at 4 months. You could be looking at 10 months here. It's really, really hard to say. But I think their next step has to be figuring out what their next move is going to make. Because remember how I started the show talking about the tone he had and how I think it was good, even if overly optimistic at times. But that's his job as commissioners, to be positive, forward thinking, and aggressive too. And he had a tone. And I'll talk about some more of his comments on tomorrow's show as well, and maybe throughout the week. But he had a general tone of, I'm tired of being seen as this conference that nobody wants, that nobody cares about. And look, I understand that there are people out there who have that perception of the Pac-12, but that's not his job. And he's tired of it, and he's bitter about it, and he doesn't want to hear, how the Pac-12 is just going to barely survive or this. I think he wants to talk about how it will thrive rather than just survive. And so if that's the case, and if he's serious about that tone and tenor that he came into Pac-12 media days with, your next move needs to be an aggressive one, right? It can't be a defensive, just announcing like, oh yeah, we're going to be able to keep everybody in place. No, you have to tell the other schools who you're going to be able to bring to the table, to bring to the Pac, however many teams it would be at that point, and then leverage that into the media rights deal negotiations that would then follow soon after. So I think that's what comes next. You have to start looking at San Diego State, or maybe go into Texas with SMU, or look at Boise, UNLV, everybody who we've been talking about for the last months here on the show. And I'm sure people will have the reaction like, oh, that's not USC or UCLA. It's not the same. It's not going to be the same. You can't replicate the LA media market. It's not something that's doable. Even if you went San Diego and Las Vegas, it's still not the same as Los Angeles, which is the number 2 media market in the country. I assume number 1 is, what is number 1? I don't know. New York City, probably. I don't know. Like I really don't know. I haven't looked at the population and all that sort of stuff. But you have to make a move going forward if you're George Kliavkoff, whether or not it's a move that will yield the results that he's hoping for. That has to be played out over time. But you have to make a move, and I think the next one is not to rush into the media rights negotiations. I think it's to go bring new teams to the table and try and make that pitch about how that will help your conference. The second part of this question from at CFB_dugout. Are you more confident in the conference existing? I think the answer is no. The answer to me is no, because the facts of conference realignment and the potential have not changed. And he said very openly, and there were other comments from administrators at media days I saw that lead me to believe this as well. I don't think the Big 12, just because Kliavkoff, kind of clapped at him here at media days and was very open about the fact that he was not happy about the grenades they were quote unquote lobbing at the Pac-12 to destabilize the conference. I don't think those are necessarily going to stop. I don't think that they're going to be deterred by what they saw or heard here. Now, Kliavkoff is just publicly reinforcing his conviction to keep the 10 Pac schools remaining together, and he said he felt confident about that. I don't know. I might need a little Charles Barkley post-game translator app. Like, I'm sure conference athletic directors and administrators and coaches and whatnot have said, yeah, no, we're in here in the Pac. Yeah, that is until somebody else were to come calling. And I don't think the Big 12, who said they're open for business, is going to be done. So now you have kind of a bidding war for the schools that have been mentioned here: Utah, Colorado, the Arizona schools, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal. You don't know, and I just feel bad. Oregon State, Washington State get left out every single time. It's not, I've got no look on the bright side for Cougars or Beavers fans here unless the conference stays together. That's what they're certainly rooting for. Cal, maybe a little less so, but like I said last week, it looked like the Big Ten was potentially evaluating them there. So I don't feel that the fundamentals have changed with regards to whether or not the conference can remain viable for the next 5 to 10 years, or whether or not it can exist in several years. Because obviously, if the Big Ten were to offer any Pac-12 school, they're leaving tomorrow. That's not, I have no doubt in my mind about that. Big 12, they'd probably go. I would imagine schools would leave for the Big 12. That'd be my guess. But maybe Kliavkoff can make a pitch or pull a rabbit out of a hat and somehow get Power 5 schools to come over to the Pac. I don't know. But I think that, where I stand is, if the Pac-12 is not able to keep those schools intact, then you're not going to have a conference here pretty soon. And is it good to see him having this mentality and clearly being incredibly serious and determined and willing to say so publicly that he's going to fight like hell for the Conference of Champions? Yeah, it is. As a Pac-12 fan, you have to like that. But still, he remains in a very tough situation. And until we see what his next move or other conferences' next moves or announcements will be, I think the underlying fundamentals of the entire realignment landscape remain the same for now. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time.